help women, save lives, and peacefully end abortion where you live.
I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired.
You were serious about that?
Be inspired to change hearts and minds by joining over 1 million volunteers taking part in the global movement happening in your neighborhood.
She says, pray that I can get through this abortion. And I said, oh, no. So she went ahead and went into the abortion clinic. And she just came out. She told us, I'm not going to get the abortion. We just had a baby saved. We had a baby saved in Memphis today. Praise the Lord.
This is the 40 Days for Life podcast with your host, Sean Carney.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the 40 Days for Life podcast. I'm Sean Carney, the president of 40 Days for Life, and your host for this podcast, which is dedicated to helping you end abortion where you live. Here we go. The first piece of shredded steel tore into the base of Joe Carlin's neck, ripped through the muscles of his back, and lodged behind his left shoulder blade. A millisecond later, another piece of shrapnel tore through the muscle of his right leg, just above the knee, all the way to the bone. A mortar round had detonated in a tree above Carlin, sending jagged hunks of German metal screaming in all directions. It was D+8, the 8th day after Allied troops landed at Normandy. The land invasion of Europe was underway, and Carlin, a 22-year-old farm boy, was down. He was not out. And this is the Memorial Day podcast for 40 Days for Life. And we open with Steve's heroic grandfather. Steve, you talk about your grandfather all the time. And obviously coming into Memorial Day weekend, Normandy gets a lot of focus. I have to say, my grandfather was in the Pacific. You're the first person that I've ever met whose grandfather was at Normandy.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing here. This excerpt that you just read was from a newspaper article. We never knew about this growing up. My dad didn't know about it growing up. He knew that my grandfather fought in the war and was decorated and things like that. But like so many of our heroes didn't talk about it. It wasn't until 2010 that this came out in the local newspaper that we really learned about it. And I think there's I've done a lot of the research here. I don't think that it was D-Day itself where my grandfather was on the beach. He came in, I think, a second wave. And so some of the guys took some of the heavier fighting. But as they got further inland, obviously he got hit a number of times. And yeah, it was Utah Beach was the beach that he was on with the 8th Infantry.
Yeah. And was he from Wisconsin?
He was, yeah. There's a little town up in northern Wisconsin called Marathon, and if you see the cemetery there, like every 3 graves out of every 4 have the name Carlin on them. That's where the Carlins came over from the Swiss. So he's a farm boy from north central Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's just awesome, and we're not forgetting, but I think as a society we forget the sacrifice of basically, if you would rank them, probably the most just war, certainly in the history of the United States, and one of the top 5 most just wars in the history of the world, World War II, and we're losing that, not just physically losing the brave men who fought World War II, but we're losing it mentally because we either think, oh, that was a really, really long time ago, which it wasn't, we're looking at 80 years, or it doesn't apply now because we got rid of Hitler and Hitler was really bad. Or what we've done very often is we name everybody Hitler, and if we don't stop him, he's going to march through fill in the blank continent, and we get into all these different kind of wars. But World War II is it. I think it's one of America's finest moment, if not the finest moment as a country. And it set us up for much of certainly the economic success. I think the cultural success before the crazy 60s and 70s. There was sort of this peacetime in the 50s, which was kind of a bubble. Um, but it was obviously a different time, and we're fortunate enough to still have a bridge to that generation because it's our grandparents.
We are, and I think Memorial Day, just for the reasons that you mentioned, Sean, I think Memorial Day is more important than ever because with greater frequency, we know these stories out of the history books, right? Like my oldest couple of kids, my grandfather lived long enough to meet them, but the younger ones didn't, and there's generations now that just have less of a direct connection there. And so I think Memorial Day, one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is to talk about not just freedom in the abstract. When we talk about it almost becomes cliche, like they made the ultimate sacrifice protecting our freedom. And Memorial Day is a day where we take those abstractions and remember that those were real men and women cut down in their primes to defend not just freedom as some sort of like academic concept, but real freedoms that we use as pro-lifers when we go out to the sidewalk and we pray and we do sidewalk outreach and we make our voices heard, and so many other freedoms that we use in our day-to-day life. It's a great day to stop and just reflect that these are real people that made real sacrifices to defend real freedoms.
Yeah, and I love World War II, and as you know, I was a history major and I'm a history buff, and um, we were really outmatched for a long time. I mean, particularly obviously before America got into the war, but it was very, very. I mean, France had been taken over by obviously France and Poland, um, and England was on the way. I mean, it very easily could have gone the other way to where there's no more French. They all speak German. Same with the Brits. And Hitler, took over all of Europe. And we kind of fight off the Japanese and maybe hit a treaty or something. But it was very much on the way that Hitler was going to win the war. And we were the difference. We were the difference, as the Japanese emperor said. I fear that I've awakened a sleeping giant. Um, After Pearl Harbor, and he did, and it was a great time. I think also with Memorial Day weekend, we obviously are remembering all of the soldiers who have died for all of our wars. Whether we agree with those wars or not, it's irrelevant. I think we have moved past that time in our country where for many years they weren't honoring the Vietnam vets or certainly the men that died in Vietnam or any other war that you disagree with, but that we remember all of them and all of their sacrifices because it's freedom is not free, to use the cliche. And I believe America truly is the hope for the free world. Particularly, I just got back from Canada, got to speak at the March for Life up there. It was awesome. Spoke at their march in Ottawa, right in front of Parliament, and it was awesome. And the Canadians, God bless them, they are doing their best. Their country and their government is communist. I mean, that word gets so thrown around so much that it's like you're a commie just because you put up a new stoplight in a neighborhood or whatever. But that's not in this sense. I mean, the euthanasia stuff, the parental rights is gone. Who's a member of parliament that said parents have no rights over their own children? Speaking in the context of educating children in public schools. So Canada is really bad. It's really bad. And that stuff is starting to come over the northern border. But Memorial Day weekend reminds us that we, as a country, are truly unique. And until we got 40 Days for Life in Scotland and England and all these places that are taking a baseball bat to freedom, I didn't really know that to the level other than like a talking point or just like, yeah, we're the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we're better than everybody else, and we got more freedom and more rights. That's actually true.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I think as Americans, we are very American centric and proud of it, right? And we can talk about things. We'll say like, well, we don't have freedom of speech anymore for you because maybe something happened on Twitter or who knows what happens. We don't have freedom of speech anymore. And if you have the same conversation in, say, Australia, it means something entirely different because it's not just that their freedom of speech is being violated in Australia. They literally, in some of these countries, don't have a recognized freedom of speech that they can even appeal to. It just is not part of their legal heritage. And we do. And that is a very unique thing. And it's something that we take for granted, but it's something that we can't take for granted because this is what gives us this is, I think, a big part of the reason why our pro life movement in the United States has had so much success, comparatively speaking, to much of the world, because we've got the opportunity to go out there to the sidewalks and pray. We've got the opportunity to march for life. We've got the opportunity to complain to our elected officials. Human rights abuses and human rights atrocities are nothing new throughout the course of society and human civilization. What is relatively new is most governments don't give you the freedom to speak out against those atrocities committed by that same government. This is a great thing about being American.
It is. It is. And let's go back to D-Day because we did that intro. I want you to pick it up on your grandpa. So obviously from the first part, it sounds like he's gonna die or be one of the many, casualties of war. But what happened?
He's in rough shape right now, right? Because as you left it, mortar shrapnel had torn through his neck, through his back, through one of his legs, right to the bone above the knee. And then he got shot in the arm. It's not looking good. He's trying to find safety. And this is what he says. This is the article continues. So now I'm in bad shape, said the
That's like you and I get like a flat tire and then we see
Yeah.
rain clouds. You're like, I'm in bad shape, baby. That
The hot
German
water was only
shrapnel.
lukewarm today.
Exactly. Love it.
Yeah, so now I'm in bad shape, the retired electrician said with a wry chuckle, rolling up his sleeve to reveal a 66-year-old puckered white patch of shredded skin, bright as a beacon amid the age spots on his forearm where the bullet left its mark. Quote, all I got is one good leg. Well, a guy named Lee Storm from Michigan, he helped me. We got out of that jam somehow. And this is where we really tie into Memorial Day. My grandfather came back from the war. He served, as you just heard, as an electrician. He raised 8 children. That was his greatest pride in life, was
Mm.
raising his 8 children, not anything that he did in Normandy. But he made it back. Lee Storm, who helped him, did not make it back. Like I said, the records are a little bit tough to sort through, but the best I can tell from the military records that I found is that Lee Storm died 2 days later in the war.
Mm.
His body remains in the beaches of Normandy. And these are the people, I'm particularly memorialize him because I wouldn't be here. My father wouldn't be here. My brothers, my children, my nieces, my nephews, my aunts, my uncles, none of those people would be there except for this man, Lee Storm, who there's possibly nobody left on earth who remembers him person to person on a personal level. But because of him and his heroism, bringing my grandfather off of that battlefield, helping carry him off, we're all here and we're all using our freedom, and more important than our freedom, we've got our lives to show for it.
It's absolutely beautiful. You have a quote in here. This is from your grandpa, Joe Carlin. Was he Joseph?
Yes.
Okay.
His funeral when he passed away actually was on the feast of St. Joseph, which was not
Oh,
planned deliberately, but I found it appropriate.
this is like literally fairy tale life.
Yeah.
Oh, with all the suffering that goes with that. Okay. Okay. This is Joseph Carlin. This is awesome. When you get hit, unless you experience it, you have no idea. For 30 seconds, you just turn cold, absolutely cold through and through, cold as death. You got to tell yourself, just breathe or you'll suffocate. Then, after 30 seconds, you just turn fire hot, like your blood is boiling on fire. That metal, when the shell explodes, it's red hot and it's inside you. And then it just starts to hurt. When I got hit, I knew it was bad. I knew it was bad. So he
I
gave
can
this interview to the newspaper. But you didn't grow up. So we had Colonel Yule on here, the POW from Vietnam,
Yep.
who flew the B-51 bomber. He grew up. He was so grateful to survive. I mean, I know him. He's my best friend's grandpa. He talked about the war a lot. He helped other guys, later on, come home from war. He talked about being a POW. He talked about his parachute, landing, waiting for the bullets to hit him. But your grandpa, he didn't talk about this. This was like you literally found out through the local newspaper.
Yeah, we knew that he had served, and we knew that he was decorated. The medals like were in a closet somewhere. They almost never came out. Once in a while, I had an uncle, I think it was, who would, Thanksgiving night, maybe mix the after dinner drink a little strong and try to get him talking. So you get every once in a while, you get like a little nugget of it, but nothing like this. This came out. My theory is this. My grandmother died in 2007. My grandfather at that point was like 88. We started to hear maybe a little bit more. And then my Aunt Barb said, hey, they're doing these honor flights where they fly the veterans out to the World War II memorial and now Korea and Vietnam. They fly them out to the memorial and just honor them for a day. And my aunt said, hey, why don't you sign up and go along? And so my grandfather did, and he was one of only two on that flight that had seen like heavy combat, all gave some, but some gave all. He was one of two that did heavy combat. And so there was a 4-part story. They had a reporter embedded on that trip. And the third article of them was just this profile on my grandfather and what he had gone through. So this is where we learned all of the stories that we didn't know before.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You're also you're at school growing up in Wisconsin. You're smoking everybody else's grandpas, when
Oh
they
yeah.
pull out their story. Yeah, I mean, that's just a whole new deal. I will say, and we mentioned this last week on the podcast, that this is kind of the beginning of summer movie season, and this weekend, what a great time to watch Saving Private Ryan. I know we watch it every year, Memorial Day weekend. It's great when the kids are old enough to watch it. Um, I remember seeing that in the theater. I was a sophomore. I was a sophomore in high school. And now everybody's seen it, and that's kind of the standard of like a war movie. The moving cameras, the bullets going everywhere. You feel like you're there. I mean, it's exhausting. The opening scene of Saving Private Ryan with at Normandy, and Spielberg. I mean, he consulted all of these vets like your grandpa. And I mean, there were people having heart attacks and passing out when they went to see it. Some of the World War II vets who were at Normandy, and he actually advised they not go, but he's the director of the movie, right? But that it was gonna be like reliving it. And you heard all these reports. It's kind of like when people first saw The Passion of the Christ, and you hear these reports of like people confessing to like murdering somebody 20 years ago, or passing out in the theater and all that. And Saving Private Ryan had that effect because it was so accurate. And I really think Hollywood does so much damage to our culture. Um, but there are certain movies, Schindler's List is definitely on that, that just brings something alive for people who kind of know what it is, and or think that they know what it is, but you can't experience it, and you can through a well done movie to some level, and have a new appreciation. Saving Private Ryan definitely did that. I mean, you just never look at war the same. You definitely never look at D-Day the same. Um, and you're really glad we killed a bunch of Germans and won the war. Um, and I just think that brings a whole new appreciation for what those guys did for people who are young, like us. Um, so the Daily Herald, um, this article ends. I'm going to use this quote. So they read this whole article, okay, on all these guys. And then the end of the article says, over the years, John Fisher, Lee Storm, and his other comrades gradually faded from Joe's memory. Then he went to the World War II memorial, and their ghosts returned.
It's great writing, isn't it?
It's great, right?
Yeah, and John Fisher was another guy who saved my grandfather's life before they even got to combat. My grandfather was like 5'8", and the ship, as they were like deboarding the ship or whatever, he's like all packed down with gear, and he goes straight into the water. He starts sinking. And so John Fisher was, I don't know if he survived the war or not. I couldn't find any records on that, but he's like a 6'4". My grandfather described him as a hillbilly, homemade tobacco, homemade whiskey, and he picked him up and carried him to shore. So that's that reference. But yeah, these guys are the guys that we remember this weekend.
Yeah, it's so awesome. It's so awesome, and it's awesome. As you mentioned, it's just great, um, great writing. Um, One of the things, here at 40 Days for Life, so Memorial Day weekend is so important for pro-life people, because if we don't use our rights, we'll lose our rights, and we're certainly seeing an attack on free speech in America. We've talked about our lawsuit against the DOJ on behalf of Mark Houck and his family. We see the targeting of Christians, the targeting of Catholics by the DOJ, and just this sort of blatant bigotry, that a new bigotry, from the DOJ and the FBI that is beyond sort of unfortunate, because it doesn't seem to be isolated, um, but rather, systematic. And so, um, we have to, you know, what's happening when you talk about the weaponization of the DOJ, it's not from elected officials. This is one of the problems that a lot of people have with how Washington is run. It's a bunch of bureaucrats, that control our lives. And we definitely saw that with the COVID lockdowns. We see it with the DOJ. You just have people that have been there for decades, and you can't, unless you get somebody who's going to reform the whole thing, who's elected. There's very little you can do about it. Um, but we have to continue to defend free speech, and abortion is an atrocity, and it doesn't matter if half the country wants abortion at 40 weeks and half the country kind of wants abortion in the first trimester, and then there's a percentage, Steve, you'd probably know it, of people that just don't want abortion at all or want it with very, very few exceptions. But it's not the first atrocity, America has committed. And Memorial Day represents, to a lot of people, our most heroic times. But I mean, when you look at slavery, the sin of slavery, and so many different atrocities that America has been part of, primarily abortion and slavery are two, I think, major black eyes. Um, we have to realize that we overcame slavery. Slavery is ended in America. I know some people think it's still going on. There is no slave. The NFL draft is not the slave trading block, as that ding dong on ESPN said. It's absolutely absurd. It's absolutely insulting to the actual slaves who were enslaved to say that you're no different than a wide receiver who's got a $5 million contract in the first round. But slavery did end, and it took a war. We're not going to have that now. I don't think civil war is actually possible. I know there was a movie out about civil war, but we all live amongst each other. It's not a geographical divide. And so famous last words, but I don't think we're headed to a civil war. I think that there is a cultural, like kind of a cold civil war, going on, Steve. Um,
I think that's somewhat of the difference between the approach that we take as patriotic, pro-life Christian Americans and the woke movement. Is the woke movement sees a problem and they want to burn it down. And you don't do that if you love your country. You fix your country. And so I think that when we see injustices in our country, whether it be slavery 150 years ago, or I guess longer than that, or abortion today, we look at Memorial Day and the sacrifices that were made by our troops and heroes throughout American history as like it's not a promise that we failed on the American dream, the American experience. It's a project that we continue. We seek to finish the job, to fulfill those beautiful words from our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. That's, I think, the real difference there. John Brown didn't end slavery by like burning it all down. It was people who went and took that heroic stand and worked for abolition and emancipated the slaves and ratified the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. That's I think as pro-lifers, I think we are the natural heirs to that legacy.
I absolutely, and we need to quote the Gettysburg Address because it's perfect in this context. This is obviously the great President Lincoln. It is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have so nobly advanced. It is for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. Awesome. This is
It's great.
also back when they all wrote their own speeches. I mean, Lincoln was just a fantastic. I have a book called Lincoln Speeches. It's like a simple book, Eloquent Lincoln Speeches, which they all were. But he's just phenomenal. A great diction, but that's here's why that quote is so awesome in a post-Roe America. There is a moving on, right? There is the future will be better. We're not dwelling in our sin. We're learning from it. We're honoring the dead. We're repenting. But we're going to rebuild the country. And if you walk around, Steve, Reconstruction and was absolutely brutal. Brutal. And then you have, people, well-educated people, elected people, sophisticated people, North and South, saying, hey, it's going to be a little out of control. Let's have a compromise. Let's, maybe have a system where the slaves can put in a certain amount of time and then be freed. And, these were like considered respectable voices. It's like similar to saying that we can kill a baby at 15 weeks. I don't know. Maybe there's an analogy somewhere. But this whole notion of like, the country's not ready for this. It's going to be bad. We're going to have all these freed slaves. They're going to be going up north, which they did. There were a lot of white people in the northern cities saying, well, are they going to live here with us? And you had that. And Lincoln just, it's just so bad that he got assassinated for so many different reasons. But can you imagine how much smoother and just what I mean, he could have been like a 3-term president, I think, leading us through Reconstruction. He would have been so popular. He was not popular most of his presidency. Obviously, somebody really didn't like him, John Wilkes Booth. But it's just so great, the leadership in the midst of pretty much the worst time in America. I mean, after Gettysburg, we just killed 500,000 of our own people, and he's sober to the reality, but he's still leading us forward.
Yeah, it's powerful and it's important because I think right now, particularly as we've seen the most extreme pro-abortion administration in U.S. history, I think there is a contingent of pro-lifers who's in the burn it down camp. Like, America's a joke. It's founded on these Enlightenment secular principles. We need to get rid of it and like have a monarchy, that type of thing. We hear it from time to time. And I think this is this concept of we've continued to work toward the fulfillment of the American promise so that those who died did not die in vain. I think that's wonderful. I think that means that we in a part can carry on the legacy of those who went before us. We don't have to accept things as they are. We can work through and using the freedoms that have been preserved to us by those who gave their lives to affect positive change. And what a great legacy that is. What a great gift that is to be able to do that. Most parts of the world, you see dramatic change come through bloodshed. I don't want another civil war because of abortion the same way we had it over slavery. And thanks be to God, for the first time now in 50 years, due to the Supreme Court correcting its error, we have the opportunity to, through our civic action, through the electoral process, through legislative process, we have the opportunity to bring about positive change, restoration of the rights of all people, born or unborn. And I look forward to it. Like you've said repeatedly on the podcast, Sean, it's messy in the short term, but the trajectory is heading in the right direction.
It really is. And we're going to play this clip. I mentioned Colonel John Yule, who is my best friend's grandpa, who I grew up with. And he was shot down in his bomber over Vietnam and was captured as a POW. Was actually in a POW camp when they passed Roe v. Wade in January of 1973. He talks about all this in the podcast. We have the link on the page. Definitely go back and listen to this podcast. And he's great. He's funny. And he came home and had 7 kids and all of this. But but definitely go back and listen to it. But here's a short clip, kind of addressing the sins of America and the context of that from a POW.
I think it's pretty apparent that I love this country. I think it's the greatest country on this planet Earth. However, as with almost everything, we are not free of sin. We have, in my opinion, 3 quote-unquote mortal sins that we have to live with, and those are the treatment of the Indians, the treatment of the blacks, and the killing of unborn children. And I can't do much about those first 2, but I plan to do what I can on that third item.
I think that's, besides the last part, Steve, where he says that, abortion is a sin. I mean, people agree to a certain level on the Indians, certainly on slavery. And yet when you throw in abortion, it's ridiculous. You're just applying history to your little issue. The problem with that is that in order for that not to be true, babies can't be human. It's not that we believe that they're human. It's that statement is ridiculous. If babies aren't human, we have to be able to know they're not human. But we know the opposite. We know that they are human because we were all one. And you're not a embryonic human or a human embryo, however you want to word it. You're human. That's the characteristic. So if we are at a level no one's ever seen before, directly killing our own unborn children with the funding of the government and the support of most politicians and all that, it's not that the slavery analogy is offensive. It's that it's the only appropriate one to use, because the only other time we've dehumanized an entire segment of our population. So I think that it's critical to point that out.
There's nothing new under the sun. We've seen this story play out over and over again since as long as history has been written.
Yeah. And one of the good things, one of our points on here is Memorial Day represents the sacrifice that so many have versus our selfishness. And I'm not going to sit here and say we're just so selfish. We're, and rip on Generation Z, and that's what typical people do. There's been selfish people all along since the beginning of the United States of America, and there's always been heroes since the beginning of our country. So that's always going to exist, but we have to counter. The idea that you're going to sacrifice is so gone. It's so gone. One of the things that all these psychiatrists are saying, and psychologists, including Dr. Phil, who's sort of the popular guy, is how dumb these trigger warnings are. Do you know what this is, Steve? I should start giving you trigger warnings.
Yeah, if you talk about anything controversial, then you need to warn people because they might not be able to emotionally handle it, right?
Yes. So, and we've done it with you before. I'll be like, hey, I'm gonna bash the Packers on the podcast, and you kind of go into a corner and do all your breathing exercises.
We're going to talk about Fauci. Get ready.
That is a trigger for me. Okay, I'm converted. I need trigger warnings because of Fauci. Thank you. Okay, I'll erase my point. So all these psychiatrists are that's the worst thing that you can do to anybody. That if you have a fear, no matter what it is, you have to learn to cope with that as a human being. And you can. It's amazing. I mean, look at your grandpa. He coped with being shot by the Germans. But whatever your fear is, a car accident, getting bit by a poisonous spider, whatever it is, you have to be being insulted, not being respected, getting dumped by your girlfriend. You have to learn to cope with that and live with it. And the trigger warnings are just eliminating that and doing harm to the person. And I think that is what Memorial Day just blows up of just the sacrifice that these guys made with a lot of these missions these guys went on, and how nervous they were and how scared they were, and they did it. They did it. It was just absolutely awesome. And I think it's really, you look at these people that brag about their abortions. We have one of the quotes here.
We've seen it a million times from
Yeah.
different actors and politicians and athletes.
So how were you able to do that? Well, I didn't have a baby. I didn't have a kid. I didn't have to deal with like second grade homework. It's just absolutely evil. But
The mayor of New York said that. Eric Adams is like, I wouldn't be up here as the mayor of New York if it weren't for abortion. And I don't know. We've seemed to have, as Roberts would say in England, we've lost the plot. I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm pretty
I
sure it
don't either,
applies
but
here.
it sounds great.
Courage is really about sacrificing yourself for the good of another. And we've turned that on its head in our culture with the abortion mentality, which is I'm going to sacrifice the life of another for myself. And I don't know that it really needs any commentary. It speaks for itself.
And with all I'm not a big Marvel movie guy, as you know, Steve. I'm not into like the superhero stuff. They're cool. I like the original Batmans and all that, but like Jack Nicholson is the Joker. How does it get any better than that? But like, you can't even keep up with these characters, and they come out and there's no story, there's no good dialogue. So I don't know. We get hate mail every time I kind of rip on Marvel. But one of the positive things is we do kind of want a hero. The problem is, as we talk about heroes like your grandpa, like Colonel Yule, like so many of those who we celebrate, all of them that we celebrate on Memorial Day weekend, the hero today is the dude that starts dressing like a girl, claims to be a girl, and uses the girl's bathroom. That's the hero. Is like a dress, makeup, and really bad hair that made that dude a hero, whoever it is, and or coming out as gay. It's like all of this. Like, nobody hates gay people. Like that doesn't exist. This is the most celebrated group of people in America. So it's so odd that those are like the heroes now.
In their defense, they are really taking a heroic stand because all they have going for them on their side is big tech, the federal government, Wall Street, every corporation, and that's all they got on their side right now.
The world's against me. Not at all. Or as the Irish say, not a bit, not a bit. So it is. It's just like no one's against you. It's being forced on us. I mean, it's crazy. If you get away from natural law and you start allowing any sexual preference or sexual perversion to be your identity, it is going to be a cultural upheaval, and that's definitely what we've had. And now it's like, well, of course we'll get it just talking about this, but you're homophobic, you're transphobic, and now that doesn't mean anything. It's like, no, nobody hates gay people. Nobody hates trans people. It's just like, it's just more selfishness. It's more like, well, now you hate me. It's like, we're not actually thinking about you all the time, by the way. Which is why they got the force of the month on us.
That's where Dr. Haywood comes in and says you're Christophobic and you're fetophobic. He just shuts it right down.
There's all sorts of everybody's phobia. Okay. So we got into this with like the hero, how hero has just been hijacked by whatever you now identify as a furry and you dress up like a little something off Little Monsters or whatever. Then you're a hero. But when we called Colonel Yule a hero, this was his response. Play the clip.
You keep saying war hero, hero, hero. But, Sean, think about it. I'm not a hero here. I was doing my job, and it just happened to be a dangerous job, and there was a risk involved. But the real heroes are those people that you are talking about, those people that go out there and do put their lives out there in front of the abortion clinics that do that, they are the real heroes, because we all know that's not an easy thing to do.
So I love that, Steve. That's just a tale of two cities, of, he's shot down, and he won't go near the title hero, and obviously it's like most saints don't call themselves saints. Most heroes aren't going to call themselves heroes. But I will say, his comment about people praying in front of abortion facilities, and I know for me, and I know for you, I speak for all of our team. Um, 40 Days for Life is full of heroes at the local level, these local leaders, local volunteers. I get everywhere I go. We met some in Canada, where you just meet a volunteer that's been going out forever, has a lot of suffering in their personal life, and they just keep going out and being a voice for these unborn children who have no voice but ours. And that is so heroic when their own government doesn't want them to do it. When the media is attacking us, all this stuff, it's pretty thankless leading a 40 Days for Life. And that's one of the reasons we do the symposium, where we train everybody, we bring them together. But it's like a family, and we'll do that in July. And everybody just, it's like a reunion, and we learn new things. We hear from speakers, but it's being together and knowing that when you go back to San Jose, California, or Moretta, Georgia, or Miami, or New Hampshire, that you're actually not alone. And it's important that we get together. And I know we're grateful for the donors who pay for that event, so there's no cost to the leaders. But it is so. And if you want to, you can give at 40daysforlife.com. We normally don't ask for money on the
/ donate.
podcast, but yeah, speaking of the symposium, but it's really the best thing that we do. Aside, of course, from this, podcast with Steve and I, but it really is. It is the bread and butter, because it's focused on true heroes that would never call themselves heroes, but that's exactly what they are. So closing out, Steve, what are some good, it's, this podcast comes out the Tuesday heading into Memorial Day weekend. Besides, we're doing the ribs and the brisket. I know. What are you doing? What are you doing for this weekend's food?
Oh, I am going to go to my friend Lieutenant Colonel Heller's party that he has every Memorial Day. He's a reservist. He has served overseas. He has served on domestic deployments, and he has a big get-together every year on Memorial Day. So we're going to go to that after. I'm going to go to, with my sons, we're going to go to a mass at the Diocesan Cemetery. And I think one of my sons will serve, and then my other son and I will play taps on the trumpet after that ends. Yeah.
Whoa, that's everything. The
Yeah.
barbecue and mass and cemetery and taps. Okay.
How about you?
You win. We're going to go to mass. We always go to
not
mass
a
on Memorial
race.
Day. It's not a race. Yeah, we always go to mass. My Mary Lisa's brother, they're all coming over. My in-laws will come over. We'll do ribs. We'll do brisket. We'll have the potato salad. We'll do the full barbecue thing. Get out there with the smoker, and then, as I mentioned, we'll definitely be watching Save It Private Ryan. That's kind of a must. There'll be a movement. Obviously, there's boy, that'd be a whole podcast. Just great Memorial Day movies. But Top Gun, the first one, Top Gun 2, awesome. Both of them, great Memorial Day weekend movies. I think I'm okay. We got a couple of emails. If you want to watch Independence Day on Memorial Day to kind of get a jump on the 4th of July, I think that's okay. I think you should wait. Totally fine with watching Jaws Memorial Day weekend, even though that's a big 4th of July weekend movie, probably the best one ever. But
I just saw something, Sean. This is important. This is really important. We talk about civic engagement, and someone just informed me that the mayor of the city in Jaws 2 is the same mayor as in Jaws 1, which is just a sign of how important it is to get out and vote in local elections.
He got reelected, and there's an argument in support of the mayor of Jaws. Okay, look, he didn't want a lockdown. Okay, he wants to protect jobs during the high season of tourism, and he's sitting here now. I know a kid got eaten, the poor Kittner kid, and other people got eaten, but the reality is the economy was good, and so I think there's got to be a little. There's got to be a little bit of like seeing the other side. He's like the villain. Great outfits, by the way, with the mayor. I mean, that guy could dress. How he looks like the mayor of a summer beach town. I mean, he's got all sorts of colors going on. Of course, it's great. In the 70s, he's like smoking 50 cigarettes like inside the little city hall building. And he didn't want to shut the city down. So he got reelected even though some of his constituents got eaten.
Price you pay.
We need to have him advise some of these Republicans on how to talk about abortion. I mean, that guy probably could just talk his way out of anything. If he's like responsible for the deaths of these people, and he's like, you know what? In the end, we had a great summer, and the beaches were open most of the time. And I did hire Quint, and he did kill Jaws. Oh my word. Okay, I don't know how we got off on that. Anyways, you can send us your favorite Memorial Day weekend movie, but definitely number one of all time is Saving Private Ryan. So go watch that. And thanks for sharing all the information, Steve, about Grandpa Joe. God rest his soul. And be sure to share this. We have a couple of links for the Colonel Yule episode. Definitely encourage you to look at that. And also, if you want to listen as we prepare for Pride Month, if you want to go back and listen to that episode last year, it really failed. We'll remind you of a couple of those things as we get into June. And so be sure to check that out. So thank you, Steve. Please rate, review, and share this podcast, and we will see you next time. God bless you.